Japanese colonial rule 1910 to 1945. Japanese colonial rule was deeply ambivalent experience for Koreans. On one hand, Japanese colonialism was often quite harsh. For the first 10 years, Japan ruled directly through the military, and any Korean dissent was ruthlessly crushed. After a nationwide protest against Japanese colonialism that began on March 1, 1919, Japanese rule relaxed somewhat, allowing a limited degree of freedom of expression for Koreans.
Despite the oppressive and heavy-handed rule of the Japanese authorities, many recognizably modern aspects of Korean society grew considerably during the 35-year period of colonial rule. These included rapid urban growth, the expansion of commerce, and forms of mass culture such as radio and cinema. Industrial development also took place, partly encouraged by the Japanese colonial state, although this was primarily for the purposes of enriching Japan and fighting the wars in China and the Pacific rather than to benefit the Koreans themselves.
By the time of the Japanese surrender in August 1945, Korea was the second most industrialized nation in Asia after Japan itself.
Wartime mobilization of 1937 to 45 reintroduced harsh measures to Japanese colonial rule. Koreans were forced to work in Japanese factories and sent as soldiers to the front. Tens of thousands of young Korean women were drafted as comfort women, in effect sexual slaves for Japanese soldiers.
In 1939, Koreans were even pressured by the colonial authorities to change their names to Japanese names, and more than 80% of the Koreans complied with the name change ordinance.
Liberation, division, and war. The Japanese surrendered to the Allies on August 15, 1945, which ended World War II, led to a time by great confusion and turmoil in Korea.
The country was divided into zones of occupation by the victorious Americans and Soviets, and various individuals and organizations across the political spectrum, from communists to the far right, claimed to speak for an independent Korean government. The Soviets and Americans failed to reach an agreement on a unified Korean government, and in 1948, two separate governments were established, each claiming to be the legitimate government of all Korea. The Republic of Korea in Seoul in the American zone, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in Pyongyang in the Soviet zone.
On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces invaded the South. The Korean War drew in the Americans in support of South Korea and the Chinese in support of the North.
In July 1953, after 3 years of bloody fighting in which some 3 million Koreans, 1 million Chinese, and 54,000 Americans were killed, the Korean War ended in a truce with Korea still divided into two mutually agnostic states. Separated by a heavily fortified demilitarized zone, DMZ, Korea has remained divided ever since.